Good morning. We're going to get started because it's 9:15. Welcome to this special invited session, Promoting Fairness Throughout the Entire Research Process. My name is Jonathan Steinberg from Educational Testing Service in Princeton, New Jersey. I see a lot of people I've seen over the past couple of days, so it's good to see you again. Steve Holtzman came to me with this idea when they were planning the conference, and I was very happy to accept this. I think it's a great opportunity to talk about all the different facets of how research works. So what we're going to do, I'm just going to give a very brief overview of the session, and then we have three presenters, and then I have a talk as well. The session is scheduled for an hour and a half, officially. However, I think, because I know people may need to check out a hotel, or may, just get their acts together to go whenever they need to. So I'm definitely sensitive to that. So I think we'll try to end around 10:15, 10:30. So I hope that'll be fine. All right, so when we talk about fairness, this is actually, now my ETS colleague Michael Zeke is the one in ETS who gives these presentations normally. So he starts his presentation with actually giving the biblical reference for where fairness actually started. So this is in homage to Michael Zeke. So it's actually a principle that does date back to biblical times. We're talking about a system of honest weights and measures. I won't give you the reference. But we see this reflected in our own U.S. Constitution. Article 1, Section 8 actually does exactly that, talking about calling for standards of weights and measures. We see it in Articles 1, 2, and 3 of the Constitution about the checks and balances, separation of powers, and some of the constitutional amendments that came later because those were attempts to improve fairness or getting it right maybe the second time. We see this in other applications as well, particularly in elections, recounts, see Florida 2000, but also the redistribution of the Electoral College based on new census data. So that's why New York's electoral votes have been dipping and other states have been rising. We see this in sports. Instant replay didn't exist until about 25 years ago, at least in football. Now it's expanding to other sports, or allowing challenges in tennis. It's actually, the concept of playing fair is in the Little League Pledge, which I thought was really cool. And since I am from ETS, I must put this slide up here, that we have a mission to support fairness wherever possible. We have it on our identification badges, which I did bring. The cover's there, but it's on the back. So we walk around these things every day with this statement that our mission is to help advance quality and equity, I have that bolded, in education by providing fair and valid assessments, research and related services, products and services measure knowledge and skills, promote learning and performance, and support education and professional development for all people worldwide. And there's a link if you want to see that. It's a nice link. So why are we really here? And I'm going to read this because I can see that the text didn't display all that on the screen. So Nancy Cole, who was the president of ETS before our current president, who was Kurt Landrat, and Michael Zeke, who I mentioned before. By the way, Michael Zeke has been at ETS, just to give you a sense of longevity at ETS, he has been at ETS since 1968. So that's a long time. Nancy Cole and Michael Zeke wrote this article in Journal of Educational Measurement in 2001. And I'll read it to you. This is the abstract. For most of the 20th century, measurement professionals paid little interest to item and test fairness. A confluence of events in the late 1960s and early 1970s led to an intense interest in fairness issues among measurement professionals. In spite of more than 30 years of effort, there is still no generally accepted definition of fairness with respect to testing, and no measure that can prove or disprove the fairness of the test. To advance the fairness of tests, measurement professionals must pay more attention to reducing group differences at the design stage of test development, to providing all examinees an opportunity to demonstrate their knowledge and skills, to deterring test misuse, and to accommodating differences among individuals. So that's a very powerful statement because they're saying, they're giving a call to action to acknowledge it and try to investigate it with the understanding that you probably are not going to be able to completely remediate any kind of group differences. So, in the context of the educational research process, which is what this session is about, it's really an ongoing cycle. Someone comes up with a study idea, they eventually develop a plan for potential study, which then goes through some kind of board approval, and then you eventually start collecting data, you report on it, and then you report it back to stakeholders, and then you start over again, because you glean from the findings, you come up with new ideas, and you come up with new projects. So that's what this session is going to talk about. So I'm pleased to have great colleagues here. I reached out to a great group of people, people who have been to NERA before and are just great professionals in their respective institutions and in the greater research community. So Dawn, and acknowledging our Rosalie Courtney, who had done the IRB work at ETS for many, many years. She just recently retired. This is on behalf of the two of them that Dawn will present first, and then we'll hear from Lisa Keller from UMass Amherst about DIF, and we'll hear from Dina Pastor from JMU about measurement and variance, and then I will talk about the promotion of fairness in educational policy decisions, and that's more going to be, just to give you a preview, a bit of a reflection about some of the things that I've encountered in my 8.5 years at ETS on the research side. So I look forward. Then afterwards, we'll have, like I said, plenty of time for discussion. And so, as Kristen Hoff pointed out yesterday in the panel, dialogue is one of the most important things we can do. So that's what I'm hoping we'll be able to accomplish this morning. So with that, that's for later. So now I will turn it over to Dawn.
Thank you, Jonathan. Good morning. I'm Dawn Wilson. Thanks for all coming. I know there was a lot of festivities last night, so I see a lot of smiles in the audience, so that's great. I'm going to look at fairness and speak to it from an institutional review board perspective. And just so I know my audience, by show of hands, does nobody know what an IRB is or what it does? Got some people that know all about it. So let's start with the basics. Fairness is bias, injustice, discrimination, needs to be fair, equal treatment. So that's a very generic definition of fairness. But within an IRB perspective, fairness is one of the three principles, the justice principle, that was identified in the Belmont Report, which came out in 1979. And this was a seminal piece of work that still today drives the federal regulations of protecting human subjects in research. The other two principles include beneficence, and that is to make sure that the good outweighs any risks, that you're not just doing some pointless pursuits in your own agenda. And the other one is respect or concern for persons, and that deals with issues of confidentiality, privacy, and informed consent. So fairness talks about representation, and to make sure that everyone is represented and not just a certain subset of people. So let's look at it at one issue, and that is administering, for example, farming questions to urban inner city students. They will not have contacts in the Midwest, and they might not have that knowledge to answer the questions, or using regional dialogue. We say soda on the East Coast, I go to Ohio, they say pop. So you gotta be sensitive to who your students or who you're administering your items to, And also, to try to stray away from formal vocabulary, like using the word Frankfurter. I know a lot of people know what a Frankfurter is, but a lot of kids know it as hot dog. But this is not the only item that an IRB at ETS anyway looks at. It's just one of the issues of cultural sensitivity. So let's look at it from a different standpoint. In the early days of the research, they used to experiment with children in orphanages, people in mental institutions, and prisoners, because they were readily available. They weren't going anywhere. However, the fairness issue is that, is one, they're not representative of the general population, and two, it's not fair to just keep using these subsets of groups over and over and over. And another piece of the fairness is bias, and that deals with all your instrumentation. So at ETS, all of our survey questions, all of our interview questions, all of our assessments go through what's called a fairness and sensitivity review if you are working with more than 50 people. So that hits upon to make sure that there's no cultural insensitivity in anything that we're asking. But let's ground this in actual practice. Now these are actual instances that came up at IRB. They've been de-identified in a way, but let's take a look at this. A project team wants to provide a pizza party to classes where every student returns a signed parental consent form. But the project director asks if this incentive is fair, or if it's viewed as a bribe or formally undue influence for students to participate. Now, before I ask your opinion on whether or not this strategy is fair, let's just have the caveat that if kids are allergic to cheese or can't have pizza, there'll be a substitute in there. But the main question is a strategy for collecting parental consent. So by a show of thumbs up, yes, it's fair, no, it's fair. I'm still tired from last night, I'm not really sure. So how many people think that this strategy of collecting consent is fair? Why do you think it's unfair? While you're chewing, I apologize.
I just think it's selecting people on the basis of maybe getting something back.
Mm-hmm. Anyone think it's fair?
Well, it seems to apply equally to everybody. It's not like you're excluding anybody, so it seems fair, even if it is a bribe.
I think the peer pressure from the other kids who want the pizza party might make life really hard on a kid whose parent won't sign this form.
These are really good points. And this is what the IRB, when we all come together as a committee, these are the types of issues that we discussed. So it did raise an issue of research ethics. Offering pizza parties may be a motivating strategy of collecting consent, but you still have to have certain features in that. Student participation still has to be voluntary. They can still withdraw at any time without penalty, so they'll still be able to participate in a pizza party. And then all the classes, if you're working with several of them in one school, all get the same incentive. Then this procedure is fair. So that is with another example, high school. The project was having a hard time recruiting 25 high school students to come and complete an online pilot assessment. So to boost recruitment efforts, the team wanted to include a raffle of 5 iPads as an incentive for people to come because they were having a hard time getting the sample ends they needed to do for the pilot. Do you think this strategy is fair? Fred is saying yes. Why do you think it's fair?
Well, because I think that it's fair in that everyone has an equal chance of getting the iPads. I don't particularly like it as an incentive, but I think that it's an incentive that could be used. There's nothing else requiring it, like high performance or anything else to limit it.
Do you think it's unfair?
What about the non-drivers?
Well, that's why we put in license to drive. So if they can't get there, there's a few caveats, but I'm just trying to exemplify some of the larger issues that we review on the board. And we determined, and based on a lot of research, that the use of a lottery to determine payment is an example of how justice or fairness can be violated since monetary rewards are distributed in an unequal manner. However, even more important, a lot of people don't understand probability theory, and they often think that their chances of winning is much greater. Even though it was only 25, these students might think that they might actually win an iPad. So down here, given that most people overvalue the likelihood to win a lottery, offering of a large payment, such as an iPad, serves to undermine the process of informed consent. So at Ira Big, in particular, at ETS, we do not have lotteries for minors because minors know less about probability theory depending on the grade level, so that's not something that's permissible at ETS.
How old would they need to be?
We typically kind of discourage lotteries in a blanket kind of way. We just don't think that it's a fair practice. Fair practice dictates that we should be giving an incentive to everybody that has similar value. You can give classes of students a different incentive, but as long as they're all in the same monetary nominal value, then that is fair. So let's look at it from a higher ed perspective. A researcher is working with the math department of a local university to administer research math items embedded in a regularly scheduled administration. The existing test will include these research items, and students will not know which items are actual test items. Although currently intended for research purposes, the new items may be included in future versions of the test. This university-wide math test is administered each spring to rising juniors, and the results of the test are used to determine student status at the school and impacts admission into some of the majors. So do you think the inclusion of these research items without students knowing is considered fair to students? I'm seeing a lot of no's. Yeah, you're absolutely right. The project raises a human subject's ethics issue of whether the benefits outweigh the risks. It's good for the person who wants to collect the research on the research items, but what are the kids getting out of it? It's a high-stake test, and spending time on questions that don't count might hurt their chances of answering those that do. It's an expeditious way of collecting research, but it's not the only way. But if the test is administered in a way that allows extra time to complete the test, including the research items, and all the students receive the same number of items, then this question is fair. This procedure is fair. So if you have 100 items and you give an hour, and you want 50 new items, you give them an hour and a half, you're still giving the same amount of time they would have in a regular administration. So that is considered fair. So let's look one last example at subgroup special populations. So we did middle school for informed consent. We did the high school with the iPads. We did the university level. Let's look at the lower elementary level. So a school is piloting a new math curriculum K-2. The district's other elementary school is continuing to use their regularly established curriculum. But to evaluate the effectiveness of the new math curriculum, researchers developed a math test to administer to second grades in both schools. Since the test will be timed, students may not be able to complete all the questions. In addition, some special education students are mainstreamed for math and will be included in this research. Do you think this particular pilot is fair to special needs students? Seeing no's? Seeing no's? Oh, you're saying it is
I'm
fair?
sorry, yeah, I'm sorry, I'm
No,
going
that's
to go
fine.
against the grain, I'll say yes, because it's, there's no impact on the students whether or not they're being allowed to participate. There's no negative impact like there was for the high-stakes test. So, and also this is going out to, but this probably falls under the, there's an allowance for educational benefits to the students when it comes to IRB rules, I thought.
That's right. So the IRB monitors participant risk to one of the questions on our form that talks about, will participants experience failure or embarrassment? In any test situation, I know for me, I always get anxious about tests. There's always a possibility that students may experience this type of failure. However, there are ways to minimize this potential by explaining they're helping us to help, they're helping us test a test. We don't know what items are appropriate for a certain age group or age level, so telling them that they're partners in our research helps to alleviate some of that stress to say this isn't really going to count towards anything. We're just kind of doing a pilot to make sure that our items are appropriate. For special education students with an IEP, however, whatever that individual plan states regarding test administration, that needs to be honored. So if there's no timer, they take the timer out. They need more time, they get the extra time to do it. If they need a translator or some other support, that needs to be honored as well. So if those pieces are available, then that is okay to do with the younger students. So in conclusion, I don't think I'm going to give you the test. We're from Educational Testing Service. It's a little early. There was a lot of festivities last night. So there's really 3 principles that all IRBs must follow. Does anyone remember what they were?
Fairness, breadth, and something.
Respect for persons, confidentiality, informed consent, privacy. This is my favorite word. If you ever watch Sleeping Beauty, maleficence. I just always remember to say beneficence. But that is that you're not just doing research for the sake of doing research, pushing your own agenda. You want to make sure that your research is doing good and that any benefits certainly outweigh the risks. And justice, which includes fairness and representativeness. And interestingly, we find that this is one that typically receives the least attention. But they're all equally important, and at ETS we look at them on an equal scale. So I think we might be saving questions towards the end, but I wanted to thank you for your attention and for coming. I know it's a bit early, so it's Friday. Thank you.
I'm so bad at technology. I used to be a classroom teacher, and I always said, I'm never going to be that teacher who can't make the slide projector work or the film strip. And then it took me like 5 minutes to become useless at technology. I'm Lisa Keller from UMass, and I'm going to talk about the role of DIF in evaluating test fairness. And just as a warning, I'm not interested. DIF is not my area of research interest. And actually, I have some issues with DIF that I've been struggling with probably for the last 10 years in my own mind. But I do care deeply about issues of test fairness, and that is part of all the research I try to do is to think about how is this a fairness issue. And I've certainly been involved in work and issues around DIF. UMass does a lot of DIF research, so I've been involved in it. But like I said, I've been struggling kind of with what DIF means and how it should be used. So that's not clear for me. So DIF is differential item functioning, if you weren't sure. And it looks at, the probability of a correct response for students matched on ability. So these are people who are supposedly of the same ability level. They have a different likelihood of getting the question right. And that is based on probably group membership of some sort. So we sort students based on some kind of group membership and look at their differential probability for success. And we do this based on some kind of manifest group, such as males and females, or different ethnic groups, and and English learners and such. So one of my big issues is the choice of groups. And I was so glad that Don mentioned the cultural sensitivity issues and saying people in the Midwest say pop and we say soda. But no one does diff on New England versus Midwest, right? And we looked at these groups, and I'm sure that the origin of the choice of groups is for some protected groups, legally, so that we don't get sued, et cetera. And a lot of times, some of the groups that we do even want to look at diff are too small. So, but my question is really thinking about the choice of groups, and are they the right groups, and why those groups? And I understand from a legal context, fine, we have to do certain things. But when we're thinking about test fairness, I think we have to think deeper than some obvious manifest group based on some demographic characteristic. So I'm not aware of the research that says inherently people of different ethnic groups are different in their abilities, and we're matching on their abilities. So the difference in their performance on a particular item seems unlikely to be related to their ethnicity, for example. But might be related to things correlated with ethnicity, opportunity to learn, etc., where certain minority groups may have differential exposure to the curriculum and such. But certainly, and that makes sense. And so, I think that, Craig, who loves diff, would argue with me and saying, right, well, it's just convenient to use those proxy variables as a way to look at it, as well as serving our goal of, maintaining legality. I want to skip that for a minute. But what does it mean when we look for differences among those groups? But, there is no inherent reason why they should be performing different based on that variable. And even if it's a choice of convenience, I think it's sending a message or perpetuating a message that people of different ethnic groups or different genders have something inherently different about them that's causing this differential performance. Like if we just think about boys and girls in math, aren't we over that a little bit? That, okay, girls can learn math as well as boys. Maybe they learn differently, or maybe, there's been attention problems. But I think we've kind of isolated that there's not necessarily a biological predetermined destiny that girls can't do math. I mean, take a look around the room at all the girls here. I'm pretty sure some of them can do math. So why would we expect that diff there? And it was really came, I kept changing in my mind the order of these. It really came clear to me when mixture modeling became prevalent in diff analyses. So if you don't know about mixture modeling, we take the manifest groups and run a diff analysis. And using then some latent class analysis to identify students who are performing like the reference group and students who are performing like the focal group, regardless then of their membership in any manifest group. So we're just looking at latent classes. And then you examine those latent classes for the characteristics in the manifest group that we're looking for. So if it's male and female, we say for the latent class 1, how many are male and how many are female? And for latent class 2, how many are male and how many are female? And what you might expect is, what you're kind of trying to see is the males should be in this class and the females should be in that class, because that's what's kind of responsible for the differential performance. But what we always find is not that. You find 60% of the males are in this group and maybe 60% of the females are in that group. But so then it's like, well, so everyone within a group is not the same. Shock, right? So it's really the diff, sorting on these groups for some kind of subset within each group seems very odd to me then, by making then what are we saying then, how are we interpreting the results? If it's really just maybe a majority of that group or even half the group, it's not always very clear how those groups lay out in the latent groups. So then when we think about then the implications for what you do next, it's not affecting every male and every female in the same way. So when we choose, and now my slides are all out of order, but so when we choose to do things like we'll throw away, we'll keep diff if it cancels out. People love to do that. There's equal male diff and equal female diff. It cancels out in the end. It's true for some males and some females. But some females respond like males, and some males respond like females. So for them, they don't necessarily get the canceling out. And so when you think about it at an individual level, diff does not think about individual level fairness. It's thinking about kind of overall group fairness. And beyond that, at the item level, not even at a total test level. So this idea that these groups that we construct based on demographic characteristics that should be unrelated to performance is odd, and then not considering the heterogeneity of those groups. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't do our due diligence and run our diff analyses on our tests. We should. But, large-scale tests are really good at doing bias and sensitivity reviews. You don't really you don't flag an item and then say, oh, it's that, look at that horrible item, how did that get through? That's probably pretty rare. It happens, and we should make sure that those things aren't getting through. But I think we need to be less routine about the way we look at diff and think a little bit more carefully about what does it mean to pick these manifest groups, and what are we saying then about the nature of those manifest groups. That makes me really uncomfortable. So when I think about test fairness, I really am thinking about test fairness. Diff is an item level fairness kind of issue. And so thinking about then how to aggregate this item level information at a test level, I think, is critical. And a lot of the diff research that I've read, and there is some out there that doesn't fall victim to what I'm talking about, but really focuses on identification of diff. And not so much on 3 or 4 steps down the road, which I think are the important steps. What is then the impact of that diff on test scores? What is the impact on any inferences made using those test scores? So even if it means a 1 or 2 point difference on the test, what does that translate to in some kind of practical way so that we can really get a sense of how fair is this test to different groups? And so I would encourage, when we're thinking about the role of diff in research on fairness, to think about extending the diff research a couple steps out beyond type 1 error and power studies, but really what are the implications at the test level and at the inference level. And really be thoughtful about the selection of groups that we use in diff. For when we're thinking about research.